So I kind of wanted to make this video to not only talk about Shen, but address the xPetu video about boycotting Shen because I think he makes a lot of valid points that I agree with. So one of the points he brought up with Shen or boycotting Shen anyways is because he's unfun, and that is due to he brought up in the video anyways that he got Shen's damage got nerfed. So I think he showed back in like early season 12, his Q damage got nerfed and his shield got nerfed, and although like it may not seem like a huge deal, like 1%, I believe the 1% max health damage for Shenq, it actually matters in the long run over like several trades and stuff like that, and it does make a big impact on from turning Shen to a somewhat aggressive champ to, like he said in the video, more supportive instead. And I do agree with that point. And the other point he made for Shen being unfun is the mythic system. So with the item changes and mythics being introduced in the game, it kind of ruined a lot of Shen's ability to lane, mostly because this is my opinion, strictly my opinion, by the way. But I have a feeling that Shen really struggles into champs with a lot of in-lane sustain, and that was made further amplified with introduction of items such as like Gore Drinker or Divine Sunder. So champs like Jax, Camille, or any champs that or any bruises that built like Gore Drinker, Shen had for me anyways, I have a hard time dealing with them in lane just because Shen doesn't have that sort of regen in his kit. And honestly, the game felt more like it was about items rather than actual champions that were fighting instead. Like it felt like the game was strictly based on items instead of champion abilities. And because of that, I also want to bring up that Hullbreaker getting introduced is really bad for Shen too because all you need to do against Shen was build that in the side lane, and he can never match you. And if Shen ever R's, you can basically just take tier 2 tower and stuff like that. So it made Shen even more obsolete. Um, Another thing I wanted to mention was a lot of counters for Shen got buffed recently. So Gwen, for example, got more resistances on her W, I believe. And Gwen is one of Shen's hard counters. Aatrox is also a really bad matchup, and he got changed a lot. I do believe he's been hovering between like D and S plus tier for a while now, but the recent changes made him like really strong into Shen. Um, and yeah, Riot seems to care a lot about bruisers over tanks. Like every patch, like they've changed bruiser items like Divine Center, Gore Drinker a lot more than they've changed tank items. From what they haven't touched Iceborne since like it got released, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and they also they did a mini rework with Jax. Like I said earlier, they buffed champions like Aatrox and Gwen. Or on the other hand, like Shen has gone multiple nerfs in a row, but no buffs, and like it seems like Riot has forgot about the champion. So, which is why he's like slowly fallen out of, I guess, meta and play, because he just seems he's just unfun to play because of these points. Another big issue with the champion is that he has no wave clear. So I believe xPetu brought it up in his video as well, where it's super hard to keep an advantage on Shen for several reasons because you're Ring a lot, meaning you're out of lane a lot, you can't catch CS, you lose tower plating, even regardless of if you're ahead or not, because whether you're ahead or behind, you're always gonna ult because that's the point of the champion. That's your ult, right? You're gonna be there to help your teammates, obviously, and the issue with that is that if you can't get the wave in a good spot for you to you're gonna lose a lot out of it, and a lot of the time you don't really get anything in return. And if you do ult with a lead, you're gonna lose that lead by the time you get back to lane, just because a lot of times people are gonna go demolish on enemy lane is gonna go demolish. They take like two platings, and then your ult is basically nullified. If you were ahead in XP, you're basically down XP now. It's just the champion is very awkward to play right now. Um, yeah, basically, what I'm saying is, if Shen R's in the current meta with the current items, he's basically shooting himself in the foot, and which is why I emphasize you need to get a lead on the champion early, so that you can actually ult without losing, strictly losing your later in the side lane, because you're obviously gonna lose stuff, but if you have at least you're gonna lose resources obviously, but if you have at least a minor lead, it can kind of negate that effect. But again, with the nerfs to Shen's damage, it's hard to generate a lead. I think in the video he mentioned that TP is taken like 85% of the time over Ignite's 15%, just to mitigate the fact that if you are, you're not as screwed as if you were taking Ignite. But yeah, Shen is just not in a good state right now. That's kind of what I wanted to mention. He did make a few points on what they could do to buff or nerf Shen. So I think the first point he made was that you can make a delay on Shen R. I think that's like so you could tell when someone's ulting rather than it being almost instant with the current Shen R. Like giving more notification, obviously. I think that's fine. I think that's an okay change, but it kind of takes away Shen's potency as being able to TP, because a lot of time the enemies are just going to back off. They already do that, and if there's even more delay, they're just not going to commit to the play, or it's going to be a lot harder to find better plays with Shen, in my opinion. The second one he brought up for nerfs was to nerf Shen, I believe Shen taunt early and have it scale towards late game, like the duration of it. I think that's a fine change, honestly. It kind of nerfs Shen's early game with like a less taunt duration, so you have a shorter window to trade. But having it scale later makes it so he's not useless later, because he mentioned in the video that Shen's W and E doesn't scale into late game at all. I think the only thing that does get reduced is the cooldown, right, and the damage, but that's irrelevant. So Shen really has no, I guess, purpose for leveling those abilities until super late. So if Shen were to get a taunt buff duration, I think that would make him more viable later on, because the taunt lasting like 1.5 seconds is pretty irrelevant, I think, towards later end of the game when there's like tenacity and stuff. And nerfing it early is fine. I don't think it's gonna ruin Shen's laning phase too much, anyways. The third point he brought up was that to nerf like non-empowered Q damage. I think that's also okay. It rewards players for playing around the Shen Q more, and it'll nerf, or it'll make Shens that aren't very good with positioning their blade even worse, which is good because it introduces some sort of like, I guess like a bigger skill check for the champion. So I think nerfs to Q damage to champions that are non-empowered is fine. I agree with that point as well. And then he also mentioned a couple buffs that I want to like briefly talk over. So he mentioned that empowered Q, if Shen does get the pass through, his empowered Q should do more damage to champions. I think that's also fine because it's kind of like the same as the last point, where if the Shen is rewarded for playing around his Q more, and the enemy laner is going to be punished more for not playing around the Q, because a lot of time right now, even if Shen gets the pass through, I think it doesn't really matter, considering that, like I said earlier, Shen doesn't do that much damage, right? Another thing they could do for Shen's Q that I thought is a decent point is increase the slow on it when they're walking away from you. This would allow Shen to kite better and make it so he has like more CC, because aside from Iceborne Gauntlet, which is what I personally build, the slow duration really isn't enough to stick onto champions, especially since Shen's cooldown for taunt is so low. So you have a lot of difficulty sticking onto whoever you're dueling. I think he also mentioned that 80 scaling would also be good on Q. I also agree that it does open up several build paths for Shen, so he can itemize into Titanic better, because that's kind of like the only offensive item you can build on Shen right now. Ever since the Wit's End nerf, where they removed the healing, I've never built Wit's End anymore, so there's no other like really viable offensive items. Sunfire doesn't really count because it's kind of a tank item. Another point he brought up was Shen W actually working. I know there's like this W doesn't exactly work properly, because he mentioned in the video that like Fiora Q still goes through with the vital, like the healing, so it doesn't actually block the ability. He mentioned in the video that it reduced it to 0, which means procs like Divine Sunder and Fiora Q are gonna go through it, which kind of defeats the purpose of Shen's ability, considering it's like an 18-second cooldown. You would expect it to block everything, right? But that's not the case. So making it so that Shen's W actually works properly is pretty important, I think. So that's something they could also work on. And then lastly, he mentioned that they should do something with Shen's W to give it like a better effect. Maybe if you max it, as you max the level, it could block auto attacks for a longer duration or something like that. I think you also mentioned that uh, it should give Shen more resistances when it's active, or like a passive effect or something like that. I think that's also good because compared to other tanks, Shen is really not that tanky. Like Ornn has built-in scaling with armor and MR items. Malphite has armor scaling just naturally through his W passive, I believe, etc., etc. So Shen is also just not a very tanky tank. So giving him those resistances would help him out in lane and in late game, which would be nice, obviously, too. Another thing I was thinking was uh, Jax. I'm not sure if you guys know this, but Jax E blocks AoE damage while it's active. Even though it doesn't block it fully, it reduces the damage he takes from it. I think they could do something like that similar to Shen, where while it's active, anyone in the radius can take maybe like 25% less AoE damage or something like that, as well as block auto attacks. Because right now, strictly speaking, Jax E a lot of time is more useful than Shen E because, oh sorry, Shen W, because it does damage and it CCs, whereas Shen W, it just blocks auto attacks. Like it's not that useful in situations where there's not too many auto attack champions on enemy team and you still pick Shen. But yeah, that's kind of all I have to say. I do agree with most of the points he said. Am I gonna stop playing Shen? Probably not, because I still enjoy his playstyle. I just wish they made some changes to him and made it so he could be aggressive and playable again. I know people are gonna be like saying, "Oh, I'm coping. I'm like a one trick, whatever." Like the same comments that xPetu probably receives, but the people that say that have not played Shen, because I feel like right now he's pretty miserable to play. Like I don't. He's still a fun champion in my opinion, but he definitely does not have the aggression and stuff that was more present in like season 11 and season 12. Like even during the early mythic stages, it was fine, but now it just feels terrible to play him. I know mythics are being removed next season, so I'm not entirely sure how that's gonna pan out for Shen, but we'll see. But yeah, I just wanted to make this video to express my thoughts, really. If you guys have any like questions or anything in the comments or your own opinions, you just put them in the comments. I'll try to respond to them if possible. But yeah, that's all I have to say.